Welcome everyone to episode 22 of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts, and today I talked with Hamish Patrick, who is a mix engineer, producer, and songwriter out of Melbourne, Australia. We talked about how he used the pandemic to level up and become a mix assistant, why the rough mixes matter so much, and how a lot of the times less plugins equals a better mix, as well as why it is so important to treat yourself as a business. All of that and heaps more. This is a big episode. Hope you're ready. This is What's That Sound podcast. You're listening to What's That Sound with your host, Stu Watts. What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts, and today I'm here with Hamish Patrick. Hamish, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thanks for joining me, and tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do in the music industry. For anyone that doesn't know you, they can find out a little bit about you.
Yeah, of course. I am a mix engineer, producer, session musician, writer, jack of all trades, kind of, which is something that I think is always useful in Australia for a bunch of reasons. But yeah, I work with a bunch of artists, most recently like Greta Ray and Elliot, lots of like Australian pop artists primarily. But it's been a fun ride.
Absolutely, man. Sounds great. So let's take it back to where music came into your life. What were you listening to back in the young days? What kind of kicked goals for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been really into music. Definitely as a kid, it was like my dad was a big influence and, always playing records around the house, which was lovely. But started playing piano pretty young, like as a, classical kind of thing. I got to about 12 and decided that wasn't very punk rock. I was sick of being told what to do. So I started playing guitar self-taught pretty badly, which, then led into playing a bit more in bands and stuff in high school. I actually met one of your other podcast, guests, Jackson McRae at high school. We were in a bunch of shitty bands together, which was a good time. And then, kind of did a bunch of music in high school and everything. And
what tunes were you listening to back then?
Oh God, lots of like indie rock, like Block Party and like Franz Ferdinand and all that kind of stuff. Was really into
beautiful.
Definitely the like, like that 2010s like. I don't know, like LCD Sound System, The Strokes.
I know it very well. I loved that stuff back in the day and still listen to it now, but yeah, wicked.
But yeah, so like even going back like 90s stuff, like I don't know, Jeff Buckley and Nirvana and all that, that was always my kind of background. I loved that stuff.
Yeah, fantastic.
But yeah, then I guess like I kind of had a bit of a left turn because I, went to school and was like, I should do something real with my life. So I went to law school for 3 years and I hated it.
Wow, 3 years, you lasted.
Yeah, it was brutal. But I left and I ended up going to VCA and doing music composition, which was much more my jam. And from there, just been working solidly with a bunch of friends and artists. And yeah, it's been great.
That's awesome. And so take us back still into like keep in that sort of time frame of when you were finding out about, the deeper side of music. When do you think that sort of came into play? Were you listening really deeply to music from the start, or did it kind of happen later when you were older?
Yeah, I was always definitely like really interested in like production and how music happens, because it seems so alien. The jump between playing a song on your bed crappily on a guitar and then hearing like this amazing record. Like I remember listening to OK Computer by Radiohead when I was like 14 and just being like, how did any of this happen? So I was always really interested in that and like definitely read a bunch of books and stuff, when you're a teenager and you just get obsessed with things. So I was like, I started messing around on a really like I think the lowest copy of Pro Tools that you could get and just found it. My dad bought an M box, if anyone remembers those things, and just like messing around with that. And then I kind of started playing with Logic, which made a lot more sense to me, being able to use loops and stuff like that. So I got into recording pretty early. I wouldn't say I was any good at it, but it was like it felt really exciting being able to kind of see the through line between something you could imagine and actually like making it, like it was an incredible
Yeah.
feeling to see that kind of sort of start to take life in front of you.
Yeah, for sure. And so you
Mm.
mentioned Radiohead. Were there any kind of producers that you remember really digging, or was it kind of just the artists more so?
Oh, definitely. Like, I mean, I got pretty deep into the Nigel Godrich like rabbit hole, and started listening to Beck. Like, I remember Sea Change and things, and like being like, wow, so one person can work on all these very different sounding things, and I guess still have some kind of influence on the process. So I definitely saw producers
Mm.
as these kind of like dark wizards of some kind, like being like, how is
Mm.
it that they're able to be part of this process despite how different a lot of these records end up sounding. So that was really,
Yeah.
I
Was
definitely
there
saw that
sort
as something I'd
of
like to do.
like,
But,
yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Was there any sort of like main things about production? Was it like the songwriting aspect, or was it the actual sonics, or kind of where was your attention back in those days?
I think it's definitely split between those things. 'Cause I think there's always
Mm.
been two kind of halves to me because I'm a massive nerd, right? So on one hand, I'm like, I love the technology of it. I love that, aspect of being able to like make something sound amazing and like being able to build up production and like synths. And I love all of, uh, you know, plugins and like getting down that rabbit hole is really fun to me. But then on the other
Mm.
hand, I've always loved writing things and like the artistry side of it. Um,
Mm.
so I think like those producers that were kind of like more involved in like making things with a band, always excited. Like I was always really inspired by like the Brian Eno kind of role,
Mm.
walking in and being like, all right, everybody play a different instrument, or like actually like having an effect on the music rather than just being like, okay, cool, here are the songs, we're just going to record them nicely. Like that always seemed quite boring
Yeah.
to me. That more like traditional like L Schmidt thing as opposed to like,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
yeah.
And so, like you said, after you left law school, tell us more about that sort of time. What pivoted? Like, what was it in you that kind of changed your mental state and made you focus more on music? And tell us, expand on that.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think I got okay grades in school and stuff, and I was like, this is like the respectable thing to do because I went to a school where that was kind of like a thing that a lot of people did. But
Hmm.
I think I realized pretty quickly that I definitely wasn't feeling fulfilled. It's like
Mm.
I'm not somebody who like is able to work very hard if I don't care, And I was doing fine and everything like that, but I was looking at the future, just being like, I can't see myself doing this for the rest of my life. Like, I don't want
Yeah.
to work in it. This is, like I can do it and it's fine, but I'm not passionate about any of this. And I think that pretty quickly it was the kind of thing of like staring down the barrel of the rest of your life doing something that just is not exciting to you. And it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
life's too short. And I think, yeah, I'm really overjoyed that I was kind of brave enough to take that leap because it was quite a scary thing, to leave something that was perceived to be quite like stable and
Mm.
kind
Yeah,
of
I
take
mean,
a
so many people could relate to that, and I think any
yeah,
creative, but musician and producer alike, we get that bug and we get that itch,
yeah,
and once it grows in you, and you like, you find the love and the way that it makes you feel, and how your body responds to it. All of those
yeah.
things, when you're young, they just dig in, and you can't let them go. And so
Well, yeah,
when you're
it's like you
doing
can't
other
not do
stuff.
it, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and so when you're doing other stuff, like you said, you're at law school. For me, it was like working retail, and
Mm.
I had a decent job. I was like moving up and getting managerial jobs and stuff like that, and it was fulfilling from an achievement sense. But it wasn't
Yeah.
like, it's nothing like music. It's nothing like that response that you get, when you're working with other people and you like learn new things and all those little things of music. It's like
Yeah.
nothing will measure up.
Oh man, I relate to that so hard. Like that's the thing. It's funny. I actually remember like one of the key turning points in that decision for me was like getting a good mark in property law, and I was just like,
Mm.
oh my god, like I hate myself right now. Like which I know sounds insane, but it's just that thing of like I don't want to do this. Like
Yeah, like who
even
am I?
yeah, like achievements are nice, but at the end of the day, like um yeah. I think especially when you're young too, it's like if you don't follow your passions, like you're gonna regret it for the rest of your life. And
Mhm.
I definitely would have. So yeah, I
Mm.
very, very much relate to you on that one.
Yeah, for sure. So take us deeper into when you started actually working. One, what did that transition look like, and how did it all start?
Oh yeah, it's I think something that everyone in Australia can relate to is that it's hard and it takes a long time, you know? I've had a really weird kind of like snaky route into working. So I work full time in music now, which if you told me like 5 years ago, I would have been like, what, how?
Yeah.
But like,
Yep.
uh, and I think it's really nice to look back and be like, it actually is possible, you know?
Hmm.
Which I didn't think probably would have been. But
Mm.
yeah, like I started off doing live session playing entirely. So some of my, I kind of like through friends and through Jackson and stuff got introduced to like some Sydney guys, Ross James and Dave Jenkins Jr., who play with Vera Blue. But yeah, like they needed some people to fill in on gigs and stuff like that occasionally in Melbourne, especially because, you know, it's kind of a specialized set of skills. You need to be able to like play an instrument, sure, but it's also like Ableton live stuff and be able to do
Yep.
playback and all these kind of roles.
Mm.
So there's a lot of really good musicians, but you also need to be a bit of a computer nerd. So like, yeah, I kind of like got an on ramp into the music industry through doing that stuff, and I started playing
Mm.
with a couple of acts, most notably probably Eves Caritas. So I did a lot of like, you know, the festival circuit and that kind of stuff, probably like 5 years ago.
Cool.
And yeah, like it wasn't what I wanted to do. Like it's not,
Mm.
you know, I like playing shows, but
Mm.
um, it's not my passion. You know, it's like I like
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
things at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But it was really fun to be like doing something in music that, you know, like it's a very immediate response, right? Like you play a show,
Mm.
there's a crowd cheering, it's nice. You feel like you're part of something.
Yeah.
But through that, I met a bunch of people, and yeah, I think probably for a couple of years I was feeling pretty like I was doing production on the side, both for my own stuff and with friends and things like that, and it was good. But I was definitely like it was a backseat to like the live stuff, just because I think it's hard to
Mm.
turn down work when it's in front of you, you know, especially
Yeah.
in an industry like that. Like you get offered stuff and you're like, yeah, I'll do that. Um,
Yeah. I think one thing as well with that is like when we're younger and we don't have the perception or, kind of just like the view of how all of the different areas that are possible to work in the
yeah,
music industry, you kind of, start off playing music. Most people do. And that seems like the logical kind of place to start. It was the same for me. I played in bands for ages, and
totally.
recording for me came a bit later as well. So it's a very similar thing, and you don't really see all of the different little niches that you can fall into. And if you asked any single person that works in the music industry, they will tell you that it's not one way. You don't just go, I
No,
found it straight away. You kind of have to try all these different things to find what makes you feel good.
yeah, 100%. I mean, that's it. um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I was definitely like doing a bunch of stuff basically but I'd say the only things I was doing like professionally would have been playing live, and then like recording and sort of production and stuff like that I was doing, and I think I was getting better at, but it was like still very much a side hustle, I guess, even
Hmm.
though I wanted it to be my main thing. And to be
Mm.
honest, there were times where I was like a little bit despondent about it, because it's like, you know, when you're like, how am I ever gonna, you know, get
Mm.
to a higher point in this, because you meet different people, you know. It's like if you're not working in studios or if you're not working with artists making music, you don't meet the people that are doing those things, you know.
Mm.
But yeah,
Mm.
I'd say like around the pandemic, or probably like the year before, like I started doing a lot more production and things like that, which was
Mhm.
really well timed. um
Mm.
because I think, yeah, I'd like met a couple of people in Melbourne, like mix engineers and stuff the year before, and kind of as a bit of a like thing to do, I started teaching myself Pro Tools just because I was a bit bored.
Cool.
And that all kind of coincided with the pandemic in a
Mm.
kind of nice way, because like
Mm.
I basically started working as an assistant for a Melbourne engineer who moved to LA about that time. This guy Tristan Hoogland, who's gone on to work on like Joji and like Vera Blue and a bunch of like big LA stuff.
Awesome.
Basically, he's, you know, had the dream kind of blow up
Yeah, fantastic.
experience. But yeah, I'd say
Tell,
that was
tell us
like
about that.
yeah, no, totally. I mean, so I'd met Tristan in Melbourne like a couple of years earlier because I was producing a song for Lauren, who was on your podcast as well.
Yep.
And Tristan mixed that back in like 18 or something like that, I think. And
Mm-hmm.
we got chatting because we lived kind of close to each other. And he's a really lovely guy. He's from Brisbane
Cool.
originally. And yeah, we got on well.
Yeah, nice.
And then I'd say like just as the pandemic was kind of probably like a couple months in, he was basically like posting on Facebook looking for like someone to help out with session preps and stuff like that,
Sick.
And it was actually like he wanted someone in Australia because of the time zone differences, right? Which actually,
that's cool.
it ended up coinciding really amazingly because like this was a time where all of a sudden I had heaps of free time because we're sitting around doing nothing, and I taught myself Pro Tools and gotten pretty good. So yeah, I'd say that's like one of the big turning points of my life, honestly. Like I can't thank that man enough. He's been immensely helpful. But yeah, through that,
that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's so cool. It's like like you said, the time difference thing, but it's also like you just went for it. You reached out to him. You kind of had already had a little bit of a relationship, whether that's just like acquaintances or friend of friend or whatever.
Yeah,
but
we were definitely like not close, but we knew each other, and I think like you're totally right. It's just one of those like it's those funny things where like you look back and you're like that was a crazy turning point, but at the time, you're just shooting your shot, and I think it's a good reminder to always put yourself out there because you never know what's coming around.
And the pandemic was a funny thing for like just kind of a lot of people trying to figure out exactly what they wanted to do, and I think so many people have thrived as a result of having that time to focus on something and not have as many distractions and just be by yourself and go, okay, what do I enjoy doing? And, for any one person, it's completely different, but that sounds really cool that you were able to learn something that is valuable to other people as well and be able to go, yeah, I can do this. I can, lend a hand. I can be that, mixed prep guy and set it all up for you, which is really cool.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, that's the thing. It's like it was an awful time personally, just like it was for most of us. But like I look back on that period of time and it's like it's been amazing long term because I think it forced me to stop and actually look at what I wanted to do with my life. Like I think a lot of young people especially, you get caught up in stuff. And I was playing a bunch of shows and I wasn't super happy and I was working a hospo job and being like, what am I doing? But like, you need to make money, you need to keep going, you need to survive. So you keep going, But for the first time in my life, I had to like actually like stop. We weren't really allowed to go anywhere or do anything. And I was like, what do I actually want to do? And this opportunity came along and like, I'm not over glamorizing it. Like, it's like downloading stems, putting it in a template, cleaning up vocals, learning to edit stuff properly, getting good at Melodyne, like all the boring stuff. But it's like, for the first time in my life, like I had heaps of free time. I wanted to get really good at something. I was passionate about it. And it's like, I look back on that time and it's like, there's no other time in my life where I could have done that, and it's
and it's also, it's just one of those things. All of those little tasks are second to none. They're like, if you don't have an understanding of the software that you're using, there are very few people that can rely on an assistant to do everything for them. So especially in Australia, it's just not, you have to be able to do everything.
Viable. Yeah.
So it's like, you just have to do it. And so that's really cool that you are able to spend that time and dig in and learn heaps about that, because those things, getting quick at shortcuts, I talk about it all the time, those little things in session prep, and they are the things that actually make your work process so much faster in the long term. Once you can understand all of that and get quick at it and not be like sitting there thinking, how the hell do I route this, or how do I set up this thing, or whatever, you just actually, you're making your process that much faster, and meaning that you can get mixes done quicker, which means more money in the long term. So unreal. I love it.
Also, I think like being exposed to the way people work at like a really high level is something that's often hard in Australia. It's like there's not as many big studios anymore, and a lot of the really good engineers are independent. Like you said, they don't have an army of assistants. Like the average person, it's pretty hard to get in front of that stuff. So like seeing how people work in these like insane high budget, high pressure environments, it's like, even though I wasn't there, which I know sounds funny, but it's like often it'd be like he'd hit me up and he'd be like, hey, I pretty much need you like on call for the next like 4 days. And I was like, okay, I'm not doing anything else, but it's like, if they're finishing a record and it needs to be done, and like, the thing is, it is silly. Like the music industry in Australia is very relaxed, but like the stuff that happens over there is crazy. Like it'll be like, you know, like the most recent Joji album got finished in like a very small number of days, you know, and it's that kind of stuff where you're like, why? It was all there for months beforehand, but the release timelines are so crazy on all of this stuff that it's like, hey, we need to do 4 mixes in 2 days and all the stems and Atmos and everything. And it's like, you just have to say, yep, no worries. And you sort it out, you know, and it's like being exposed to people working really well, really quickly. And like, you know, it's very inspiring, I think, often.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be taken from like those workflows, even if you're not doing that stuff, you know, it's like you don't have to be working on some crazy high budget thing to appreciate like how to do something well, quickly, keep custom, you know, because at the end of the day, like I think a lot of engineers here too forget that it's a service industry. Like if you're a mixer, you know, your job is to keep your clients really happy. So if they ask for something insane at, you know, midnight and you can deliver that, you're the guy who's got the record, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're the person who's like, nah, fuck you, your notes are bad, or, you know, like I disagree with your creative take on this mix, or, you know, it's like, that's not your job, you know?
Correct. Yeah.
So learning a lot of that stuff, I think, has been almost
crazy.
more helpful, you know?
I mean, you've seen more of it than I have, so that's unreal. I love to hear it, and I think, you know, the more that you can see is, it goes without saying that every little bit of like knowledge helps, and just being able to observe, you know, anyone, like you said, in that high pressure environment where things need to get done as quickly as possible, it just means that you have that awareness of, where do my priorities lie, or when I'm working for myself, how can I get better to make things faster for my own process? So I love it. So on that, tell us a bit about, you know, some of the stuff that you have worked on for yourself and, you know, your own music, as well as working for clients as the, you know, the lead producer and things like that.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, in the last couple of years, I've been kind of splitting my time between the assistant stuff, which has been great. You know, there's a lot of like big, impressive releases there that often aren't like, the thing is, those credits are often like kind of bullshit. Like, and I say that in like a nice sense, you know, it's like, but it's great because that stuff lets engineers level up, you know. It's like you can say that you worked on X crazy thing when in reality you didn't do very much, but that's kind of how the system works. So a lot of the like big fancy things are like that, where it's like maybe I did a vocal edit or something like that on that, but it's cool, you know, it's cool to be able to say that.
You did it.
Yeah. But I'd say in the last year I've been doing a lot more mixing for myself, which has been really great.
Cool.
So yeah, starting to move into that. I've like mixed a couple live things recently. Elliot's new record comes out on Island in, you know, a couple months, and I did
Unreal.
like the lead single. They've done like a big live video, and I played in that, mixed that, which was cool. I've been doing a lot of vocal production as well, which has been a really awesome sort of side thing, I guess. I'm working on the new Greta Ray record at the moment. I did most of the Elliot record. This other Melbourne pop artist, Eilish Gilligan, I've done all of that, and I'm mixing that record, which is really cool. I work a lot with Gab Strum, like Japanese wallpaper. So it's been like, we've got like a nice little community in this studio, I guess, where like we all kind of work on a lot of the things together. But yeah, especially all that, all the assistant stuff has helped me get pretty good at melodyne and things like that. So there's a lot of like vocal production, which is, you know, there's a massive difference you can make to a recording if all the vocals are like in tune and in time, you know?
Absolutely.
Especially if people are going for that like big pop sound, which like when you go listen to a Dua Lipa record or something compared to like a sort of like more amateur pop thing, often the difference is how good the vocals sound, and, you know, small timing
attention
differences.
To detail.
Like attention to detail.
Yeah. Like, you know, cutting out breaths or leaving breaths in. It's like,
totally.
You know,
and choosing
what choices.
Exactly. But also
so
stuff
tell
like,
us. So sorry, go ahead.
No, just like the number of times you get in stems, like especially when I'm mixing things and, you know, backing vocals, they're singing different notes, or like, you know, timing differences and stuff. And it's like, that's fine. That's part of making music. But when those things are all working together, you know, it's like the momentum that gives it can really lift the production, which is, it's a really cool process to be part of. So that's been really fun. But
it's I love that you say that. And I think a point that kind of I can stem from that is every little thing matters. And when you don't have control over the recording process, if you're not doing the vocal production, you're just getting stems from someone, you're a mix engineer, it depends on what you're being paid to do and what the artist wants and all that sort of stuff. But if you can be someone that says, hey, I noticed that these things are out. Do you mind if I tweak them and try and improve them and get them a bit closer and see if you like the end result? And you actually take the time to do those little things like cut out breaths, make sure all the words start at the same time. Like you said, making sure the notes are in tune and together with each other, that there's no kind of wayward notes and things like that. All those little things, they are things that just add up so much. It's like attention to detail is so crucial and makes the biggest difference to the end result. And like you said, it is the difference between something that's here and something that's way up there.
I couldn't agree more. And I can also tell you the difference between a good mix engineer and a bad mix engineer is attention to detail at the end of the day. Because like you read interviews with like John Haynes, like Serban Gania's assistant and stuff, and it's like at the highest level, they're still doing that stuff. They're going through every vocal by hand. They're deep-breathing it. They're checking for consonants. They're checking for weird, like that's what makes these records great,
Yep.
And obviously it's case by case. You're always trying to do the best you can with the budget you've got and the time you've got. And like sometimes the record needs to be mixed in 4 hours and you're probably not going to have time. But if you've got time, that stuff really makes a difference. And yeah, I think like often like the number one thing you see from producers when they're sending stems to you is like, heaps of low end, like out of tune or out of time, like breaths and stuff like that. It's just like messy things. And it's like, it's usually unintentional and it's often a byproduct of like the way Ableton works or the way Logic works or whatever it is. It's not like one door is better than another, but I think like the great thing about getting audio stems when you get to mixing is that it lets you like look at that stuff a bit more critically rather than kind of like getting lost in a big session. And
absolutely,
that's why you're there at the end of the day. You're like a check and a balance, to make everything sit together properly.
Yeah, it's quality control for sure. And you, I think all of those little things that you're saying are great. So tell us about your process and, how you've refined that over the years. What does it look like to you, say when you get a session and when you start working on it, what are all the things that you make sure that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, one of the biggest things is like, firstly, like not overcomplicating stuff. I see a lot of like young engineers, like you'll see vocal chains and stuff with 30 plugins, and it's like, go off, you can if you like, but generally overprocessing is the number one source of like a lifeless piece of music, because like you'll kill the dynamics, you'll make everything harsh, like it's not usually necessary. I think like being exposed to the way like a lot of these like bigger mixes work, it's like it's really not uncommon to see a session come in and the only plugins that are used are like Pro Q and some volume automation, because it's like the stuff, if it sounds good, you don't actually have to do anything, like it's actually okay to do less, and you know what I mean? So like I think often it's like you listen and you see what you actually have to do. Don't just do stuff for the sake of doing stuff. Like,
yeah, exactly.
A lot of engineers think that because they're getting paid to work on something, their job has to be to do the most, and it's like, if it sounds good, add 5%, like just fix, and like that, you're doing the right thing,
and I think on that as well is like you made a good point of like only touch what you need to touch. And so what it actually does by leaving it where it is also retains a lot of character. When you add and clean up and change, things to make it sound the way that you want to sound it, potentially you're changing the way the artist wanted it to sound or the producer wanted it to sound in the first place. And so
whenever
you have
I'm talking to an artist, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say you have to allow for that character to shine through, because that in the end is what will give you your signature sound, because you know where things need to sit, what tonal character the vocal needs to have, what compression needs to be added. A lot of the times the things that I see, like piggybacking off what you were saying when you receive mix stems, is the over compression killing a lot of the transients, killing a lot of the, quiet things, staying as quiet things, adding too much EQ so that everything sounds too tinny and thin and, you're
Yep.
losing a lot of the bottom end. All of those little things mean that you've lost the character of the initial performance.
I totally agree. Whenever I talk to clients, I basically like about a mix, basically. Like I'll say some variation of like, there's essentially two types of mixing, right? And I like genuinely believe this. There's the old school way, which is like your, Chris Lord Alges of the world, who were like they were hired to put a record together. At the end of the day, like the recordings would sound kind of messy and all over the place, and you hired these people to come in and really like make the sound of that album, and that's a really cool job. And I think a lot of modern mixers still want to be those people. But the nature of the job has changed. Producers are working from home. There's samples, stuff sounds a lot better than it did. Like the rough mixes now are often quite good, especially as you go up the chain and producers get better, So it's like, if the producer and the artist are really happy with the rough mix, it's not my job to come in and like put my stamp on it. Like you actually don't want that. I don't want that. You don't want that. It's more work for me, firstly. So as an engineer, it's like you're wasting your own time because you're going to spend 3 days on a mix that you'll send back and they won't like because it doesn't sound like the rough anymore, and that's actually okay, And I think one really important lesson to learn is that your ego doesn't matter here. Like you're not the star, and that's fine, like your job is to make it as good as it can be. And and at the end of the day, that's the artist's vision. And like, so your job is to facilitate making the best sounding version of the thing that they sent you. And, that's
one thing I want to ask
goal.
on that then is like, what advice would you have for people that are working on their own music, just starting up? A lot of people don't have access to working on other people's things to start learning. So what advice would you give them then for just starting out, working on their own tracks? How can they how can they take that same mindset and apply it to their own music?
My number one tip on all that stuff is, don't mix in the production session. You're gonna like tweak. Tweaking is the enemy of like being able to look at something critically, because you can just open up like maybe drum rack and change the sample, or like, like you actually need to be in a different state of mind. So like I would always recommend print stems for the thing that you're working on, your own song, put it into a new session. You can't change any of the sounds anymore. You're looking at it like a mixer, yeah? And then like the other big thing is reference. So like go, like whether it's in the same session, there's lots of amazing plugins you can use. Like there's one I use all the time called Metric AB, which is part of that Plugin Alliance subscription. Yep. Otherwise, there's like heaps of other free alternatives. Even just, rip a song off Spotify or whatever and drag it into your session and make sure it's at about the same volume as your mix so you can compare them. But like have a listen to something that you think your song sounds like, right? Because 9 times out of 10, like any mix engineer will pull up a song and they'll be like immediately like, okay, there's no high end in this, or there's no low end in this, or there's too much. It's like these broad things are often the things that are like easiest to fix, like.
Yeah.
So,
and it's funny, like on that is like with the certain stems, you're not listening to things in isolation. I think a lot of people when they're first starting are going in and getting into the weeds on a kick drum and stuff
totally.
like that.
Everyone has done that. Like you've got that thing soloed, and it's like, but that doesn't tell you any information. I have been so guilty of that, but like. And I think mixing I just mean like, think about in the 60s when they were mixing Beatles records and stuff. It's like they had 8 tracks or whatever. It's about the balance of the elements, and I'm not exaggerating. Like there are multiple like multi-million stream things that I've like assisted on where I've seen the mix session, and I'm serious. There's nothing but EQ and volume, because like at the end of the day, like if all the parts are kind of cool, that's your job is to work out how they fit together. So it's like.
And I think
that's from scratch, turn some stuff down, and that's a massive one. Like, literally just like try starting everything at 0, pull up like your vocal, your kick, and your snare. And when they're feeling good, fit everything in around them. Try some panning. Don't put any plugins on anything. And then like, you'll be surprised often how much better that will feel.
Absolutely. And these are really cool exercises that you can do. Even if you've been doing it for a year or 2 or 3 and you feel like you've kind of got a good rhythm, it's still very humbling to try and challenge yourself to do exercises like that where, you know, it's what I want to say is it's a difficult concept for people that are first starting to understand that everything plays off of everything else. So like what I was saying before with the soloing stuff, if you're only listening to things and getting that one sound as good as it possibly can be, as soon as you bring it back into the mix, you've affected everything else. And so the best thing that you can do when you're first starting to get an understanding of how things play off of each other is to do like what you said, you know, blend things, just like put things in, you know, drums, get the drums sitting as an instrument together, get the vocals sitting around the drums if the drums is the focus, get the vocals first if the vocals are the focus, let everything else play into each other and allow them to find their space in that mix. And like you said before about dynamic mixes, that's where the dynamic mixes come in. Everything has its own pocket. Everything sits in its own space, but works together as a whole.
Like one of the best tricks I also think like, think about what the function of everything in your song is doing, right? Because like go listen to some really cool stuff that's coming out at the moment. It's like currently the trendy thing in pop music is like minimalism. There's not actually that much going on. And it's wild to me listening to some demos from people who are referencing like say Billie Eilish, and it's like there's 100 tracks of synths in your song, you know? Go listen to a Billie Eilish song. There's 4 instruments. It's like 808 snare.
There might be 50 vocals.
But the thing is, they've decided the function, right, of each of those things. And I guarantee you, if you listen to them on their own, they probably sound a bit weird. But it's kind of the same. Like a classic example I have is like bass, right? So say you've got a synth pad with heaps of bass in it, like a Juno or something like that, right? And maybe verse 1, there's no bass. It's just the synth pad and the vocal, right? As soon as the bass comes in, duplicate your Juno and cut a bunch of bass out of it. You will not hear the difference, but you've just cleared up all the low end in your mix as soon as the bass comes in, because those two things aren't fighting anymore. Like often the problem that people do is that they get stuck in like this static thing. Everything has to sound the same the whole way through the song. But it's like you actually need to be deciding the function of each instrument throughout the piece of music. If there's more stuff going on in the chorus, you're probably going to want to cut more out of everything, you know, to make it all fit together. Whereas in the verse, it's going to sound hollow, you know, like think of the function of the elements. Like, yeah. Does that make sense?
I love it. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, thanks so much for listening so far. There is plenty more to come, so don't go anywhere. I just wanted to let you know that this podcast is made completely independently by myself with no sponsors. So if you like what you hear and you would like to show your support, you can send a donation to the PayPal link, paypal.me/whatsthatsound. The link is also in the show notes. Thanks so much for your support, and let's get back to it. Sweet. So tell us a bit about, you know, some of the stuff that you worked on. What do you find when you're mixing, when you're having a good session? What does that mean to you? Like when you're in a good mixing session?
Oh, good question. I think like there are days where, you know, it's really easy to like spiral, and, you know, if you're like comparing yourself to say the rough or something like that, it's really easy to be like, oh, what am I doing? I'm in a hole, you know. It can be like quite a psychologically challenging thing, especially in an era of roughs being like crazy loud, crazy bright. Like most producers are slamming the hell out of everything to a point that's like often quite funny. But you know, I think it's important to remember like that like you have been hired for your ears and you're doing fine, you know, because like you'll have days where you do end up in that kind of like bad headspace. But I think often just taking a break, like that's so important. Go outside for 15 minutes. Like you're not going to get anything done by staring at the computer with, you know, like when you're in a bad spot, you need to change and stop listening to music for a second and come back. And when you come back in with fresh ears, that's usually like a way to get past that. But when it's feeling good, I think it's like, you know, I think it's great when you can actually set some goals for yourself. That sounds silly, but it's like often like I'll start by listening to the rough and actually like with a notepad or something like that, writing down like, okay, what are the key things that I need to do today, you know, because every song's different. And it's like, otherwise you get into the habit of just doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff. So it's like, what does this song actually need? So, you know, sometimes you'll listen to the rough and you'll be like, okay, there's no high end, or the drums sound bad, or, you know, whatever the thing is. But like make yourself some goals so you can tick them off and actually feel like you're getting somewhere. I think that's they're the good ones where you're like, I've
Yeah.
achieved the things I'm trying to do. I'm referencing the original and other stuff, and it sounds as good as other stuff, and it sounds much better than the original, you know?
I think it's a great point, and it's actually a point that a lot of people that have been guests on this podcast have made is you know, taking the time before you even start to think of what you want to achieve at the end of it, because then you set yourself kind of like a roadmap. And, you know, once you have been doing it for a good few years and you kind of have a process, you kind of know what needs to go next. And it's easier to be like, I know right now I'm getting stuck on what I shouldn't be. It's that awareness after, you know, doing it quite a few times to be like, why have I been mixing drums for 2 hours? Like, what the fuck's going on here? Let's take a break.
100%. And often, like, because the thing is, like, it's pretty well documented that listening, especially if you're listening loud, you know, for a long period of time, it's like you lose any perception of what sounds normal. You could be listening to the weirdest sounding mix of all time, but after 2 hours, you'll be like, yeah. And then you walk outside, you come back in, you're like, oh my goodness, you know?
Yeah.
So I think those quick breaks are actually really important. Like, you know, you'll often get more done in half an hour when you're really focused than you will in like 4 hours of messing around when you're feeling lost. So
definitely.
And also remember to listen to other music, you know, like it's really easy to be like, this is what music sounds like. And then you go listen to the reference track or something and you're like, oh my goodness, we are in a different universe. I've cooked it, you know, so.
Yeah, that's funny. And I think taking a break is something as simple as stepping outside of that room, getting some sun, adjusting your ears to a different thing, you know, whether that's having a conversation with someone, you know, it just shifts your brain to stop being in that mixing headspace and getting stuck in where it's like when I get home from work, sometimes if I've been zoned in and have worked for maybe too long on something, I'm terrible to talk to because my brain is just not in like in the same world.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it actually makes you better taking breaks, you know, which is a nice thing to remember. I think sunshine's really important. Like I'm very lucky. I've got one of the few rooms in this place that has a window. So that helps.
Sick.
But a lot of the others don't. And it's like you can see them getting crazy throughout the day. It's like if you have a studio that's dark, that's fine. Maybe it's vibey, but literally go see some sunshine. Get a coffee. It's good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's times when you like I'm right in the middle of this facility. I'm like dead smack bang in the middle, and it's completely walled off. It's very soundproofed, and like I walk outside sometimes, and I'm just like blinded by the sun. But I love getting sun, and I love having breaks outside, eating my lunch outside, little things like that. Again, just having chat to other people that are around. It's just so refreshing because you know you have a laugh, your brain kind of gets separated from the task at hand, and it's just a really good feeling. It actually makes me feel better.
Yeah, totally. I think,
go on. Sorry.
Oh no, I was also going to say, I reckon like the good days are the ones where you don't end up blasting it too. I think like most of those days where I feel like I'm getting lost, I'll turn it up to try and get excited or whatever. And it's like, it's the worst. Don't do it. You know, most of the like best engineers I know, like keep the speakers at like quite low volume all day. And obviously it's easier with better speakers as you move up to like ATCs and stuff, you can have them really quiet and, you know, they still sound pretty accurate, I guess, you know, which is definitely harder if you've got a $400 pair of Rockets or something. But
exactly.
Like just for trying to, you know, keep things at a volume that A, isn't going to fatigue your ears, and B, like that'll actually make you hear better because as stuff gets louder, you need it to be brighter. And it's, you know, what is it? The Fletcher-Munson curve?
Fletcher-Munson curve. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Tell us about some of your, like, what excites you in a mix? What are your favorite elements to work on?
At the moment, I get really excited by dynamics. I'm like, I feel like there's been like a lot of really like flat sounding music in the last couple of years because, you know, as stuff gets louder and everything. So I'm excited by like records that like have peaks and valleys, you know. It's like I actually think it's nice to listen to stuff that sounds a bit more human, which is cool. Also like I guess less processing. Like it's really interesting to hear even like I guess like Jack Antonoff as an example. Like
I was thinking him. I was legit thinking him.
It's funny, like people give him a lot of crap, which fine, do your thing.
Really?
But when you go listen to like the newest Taylor Swift record as an example, go listen to any pop music from 10 years ago and listen to that. It's got basically no high end, like lots of like really warm sounds. It sounds like a record from the 70s or something almost. It's really unusual, and I think that's exciting. It's like nice to hear people challenge the convention of make everything bright and loud, and not to say I don't love that stuff sometimes, but I'm really enjoying this trend of like more humanity in like mainstream pop music, like listening to, I don't know, the new record from the 1975 as an example. It's like it's all just like played on real instruments and like really well, which is kind of exciting. It's like a weird reaction almost to the extremes of like programming that I guess we've all gotten into in the last 10 years.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what it does to me is it draws out the importance of recording things well, because you won't get a good drum sound that hasn't got much processing on it unless it's mic'd properly. You won't get a good guitar sound that sounds like clean and easy to listen to and not harsh if you haven't taken the time to sit up against the speaker and like move the mic around to find the exact right position for that to get the best sound. So there's things that digital has done to make things easier and faster, but it has taken us away from taking the time to make sure things are right before we hit record. And I think that's like something that Jack Antonoff does extremely well is, if you listen to some of the drum sounds like you're saying on the 1975 or Bleachers or anything like that, the sounds are minimal, but they sound great. They just sound like drum kits, and
but also they're interesting, and I think that's nice. It's like it's nice to hear people take. I mean, it comes back to what we were saying before about attention to detail, but it's like it's so much more interesting to hear something that sounds a bit weird and human and like strange, but like flawed in a good way is the way I'd describe it. As opposed to like a perfect sounding like DI'd guitar or a perfect sounding drum kit because it was Addictive Drums or whatever the thing is. It's like I'd much prefer to hear a human do something in a weird way than a computer do something perfectly.
And I think something that I've noticed with like, especially with like loud rock music and metal and stuff like that is, obviously there's a different mindset that you have to be in when you're producing that sort of music. Everything has to be perfect and things and this and that. But if you listen to the artists that are at the top of those, I noticed that their drum sounds aren't always like this super blown out, over processed. Every snare drum sounds like a bloody machine gun. It's not like the best of the best are actually doing things differently and are like taking things in different sonic like possibilities and all those things. So I agree 100% with you. Yeah.
And I mean, in that space, as an example, like most bands that are trying to emulate those guys are programming all their drums. That's why the sort of smaller records often sound, a bit lifeless, is because they're like, I mean, I've had my heart broken a bunch of times by engineers telling me the drums on like X or Y record were all a computer. And it's like, you can hear it when you go back and listen.
Yeah.
But like, I think you're right. Like, obviously metal is like extremely complicated technical drumming, but I'd always prefer to hear like something that sounds more human, I guess, if it's an option,
So let's get a bit nerdy and let's dive into some of your favorite pieces of gear. Let's start off hardware. You're mixing, but you're also producing and recording. So tell us a bit about some of those pieces of hardware that you are currently liking.
Sure. Hardware wise, I reckon, as far as mixing, I'm basically entirely in the box at this point, which is great because, recalling stuff and everything, it's just like, I've got friends who use analog outboard and it just seems too hard. Like, I get it. I'm sure it sounds better by 1% or whatever, but I have a strong attitude of like, don't get too attached to stuff,
Yeah.
But as far as production goes, gear is great. I think when you're in the room with people, it really helps people get a vibe. And I think artists really love being able to put their hands on something and like be involved. I see a lot of producers like do everything and have their artist sitting in the back of the room on the couch or whatever, and it's like I think that's a pretty like soulless way to make music together. So I find like things like keyboards and guitars and stuff are great to have around. Like, I haven't panned the camera, but there's a bunch of guitars over there. And at the moment, we've got a Juno 6 set up, which is probably my favorite synth of all time. The 6,
Sweet.
the 60, or the 106. They're all relatively interchangeable. Yes, some of them are different, but they all, I think
no, it's
that
cool.
synth,
And I think your sound, based on all the stuff that I've listened to, you achieve a very, clean sound. There's production elements and there's like lots of reverbs and stuff being thrown around. But at the end of the day, when you listen to it, it's crystal clear. It's very easy to listen to. There's no like, oh shit, what the hell is that frequency or anything like that. So, what
Thanks.
about microphones are you getting into?
Yeah, I mean, vocal wise, it's almost always a larger diaphragm condenser of some variety. Sometimes, so studio friend Alex O'Gorman, he's got a U47, which sounds amazing. Always happy to borrow that one. But yeah, otherwise, like we've been big fans of the Mojave MA200, which is it's about 2200, which is like high, but it's nowhere near on the range of like some of the big famous expensive ones. And I reckon that mic outperforms just about everything in its class as a vocal mic. It's like bright without being brittle. So my number one hatred is like vocal mics that sound bad on female singers, basically. It's like that kind of like 5K up range just becomes like glass on a lot of female singers, especially, where it's just like unworkable. And that mic has a really nice high end without being like painful. It's all those frequencies you're talking about where you're like, oh, so I love that 100%. Guy. We've been getting around the KM84, the Neumanns, just little pencil guys. They've been a lot of fun. Just great for like, pretty much anything, honestly. I'm using it at the moment. It's not the ideal vocal mic, but it does the trick. But like guitars or pianos or anything like that, beautiful.
Well, I think I recently got the WA84s, which is obviously the cheaper version. And I was honestly surprised. I don't know how they compare to the KMs. I'm sure the KMs are a little bit nicer, but I was very surprised when I put them over to a drum kit how kind of broad the spectrum of the frequency response was over the drum kit. I was getting kick drum in it that I hadn't heard in overheads before, so I was stoked
honestly,
on that. So
agree, they sound great. I will make a caveat and say I'm like a bit of a strange engineer in a lot of ways, because it's like I didn't come up in studios recording bands and drums and things like that. So I'm way more focused on vocals than I am on like guitar cabs or anything like that. But like Alex,
if it works.
Yeah, Alex has been my like mic spirit guide. He recorded and produced like the Angie McMahon record and a bunch of other like really beautiful stuff. But his like whole MO is like recording things really well, and which is a skill that I think is amazing. I'm always blown away. I don't know if you know Matt Redlick. He's another Melbourne producer who's just like a mic genius, but it's like that stuff where you can just record a band and have it sound incredible. But yeah,
nice. And tell us about software. You're using Pro Tools still?
So yeah, I mean, I mix in Pro Tools. I predominantly produce in Ableton just because I kind of like that's just I'm so fast in it that it's like hard to replicate a lot of the workflow in Pro Tools, Like I'm really fast in Pro Tools for mixing stuff, but I don't understand how anyone programs drums as quickly or, MIDI stuff especially. But yeah, it's quite useful being able to work across a few pieces of software. It's like you don't have to be a genius at all of them or anything like that, but having the software literacy to be able to like talk to a producer who uses something else or whatever and make it make sense.
Well, I think literacy is a great word because it is like a different language. You're learning what is applicable and what's appropriate for different applications. So it makes 100% sense. Talk to me about plugins. Let's dive deep in here because you're mixing a lot, and we've talked a lot about mixing, and I want to unpack what are some of your favorite plugins that you love using currently.
Sure. I mean, I want to make a caveat in that, like, I spent a long time buying like every plugin of all time. Like, it's really bad, and I think that's the number one trap that most young engineers fall into, of just like thinking that buying something is going to make you better at something. And like, I have bought so many less plugins in the last few years than I used to, and a lot of it's because you realize that it, like another EQ isn't going to make you better, right? But having said that, I think the Fab Filter suite, I mean, I feel like that's a boring answer, but it's a boring answer because they are that good. And everyone I know, like Pro Q3 or 2 or whatever you're using, that's like, it's just almost the industry standard, I reckon.
100%. Every single person that I've had on that loves mixing is, has mentioned that one. So, yeah.
Having said that, though, like, it's, having something like a Pultec, as well, or like, Gab and I are big fans of the API 550s, the kind of like more band-based ones. It's good to have like, I think, 2 types of EQ in your arsenal. You want like something surgical and something broad. Because like, especially when you're doing vocals and stuff, often being like, I don't know exactly what I'm looking for, but being able to hear the difference, like when you move through those like programmed bands is really handy. So I think that's a good one. Like the universal audio stuff is really good. I'm trying to wean myself off it a little bit just because like, export speeds and stuff like that, especially moving to, it's nice being able to mix on a laptop when you're traveling, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not having to carry your stuff around, but I do keep coming back to a lot of their plugins because they're just really good. The Spark stuff is great too, being able to use their stuff without needing, a satellite.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I wanted to just touch on the point that you made about ease of use, and it's such an important thing because it really matters. If you're someone that doesn't have their own studio and you're watching this and you mix on headphones and things like that, one, obviously you need to have reliable headphones, but the ease of like moving from place to place and knowing that you're able to do what you need to do is really important. So and the other thing I wanted to touch on is the 550s. What I love about them is when you get to the 12K range, it really gets intense. Like it's kind of like subtle up until, 9 or 10 decibels, and then it's just like blown out and you can really make things sound crazy. I love that. Yeah.
They're awesome. And like if you've got the UA Spark subscription, that's a really good option because you get the API Vision channel strip and you can switch out the EQ module in that for the 550. So that's a native version of the 550 basically. So that's been a nice little hack.
Yep. Same thing with Plugin Alliance actually with their their API channel strip. You can,
I think.
Yeah, Lindell. Yeah, and you can change out the different EQ modules as well on that channel strip. So yeah, good point.
Yeah. I mean, the Plugin Alliance, like if we're talking pure value, I think the Plugin Alliance thing is just incredible. Like if I was recommending what plugins to buy to a new engineer, I'd say like get Pro Q3, probably a Plugin Alliance subscription. And if you can stretch the extra, get the UA thing, and across that, like you can definitely mix a record with that stuff. Like, I mean, you could do it with stock plugins, to be honest, in Pro Tools and Logic for sure. But like, you'd be covered. They've got everything.
Yeah, for sure. Tell us about compression. What are some of your favorite compressors?
I'm pretty basic on that, like the LA2A and the 1176. Like 9 times out of 10, you listen to a vocal, it's way too compressed. It's like, I think vocals especially are my primary, the primary place I'll go to for compression. Like I try not to compress other stuff too much because I think often you don't need to, like unless something... Obviously, there's caveats. Like if I've got a bunch of guitars playing a similar part, for example, that I'm trying to fit into a mix or something, great, And drums, I quite like parallel compression as like a layer. But yeah, I think don't get too sucked into like the endless number of plugin compressors. Maybe one of them's better than the other, but at the end of the day, you just need something that lets you do the job. And having a slow kind of like opto style one, like an LA2A, and a fast, compressor, that's like the primary thing that you ever need.
I think what we were talking about before with, the bundles, that you can get from Slate, from Plugin Alliance, from UAD.
All of them are great.
The good thing about those bundles is they have all of the multiple different compressors and you can actually start to understand, okay, what's the difference between an 1176 type compressor and what's the difference between, like you said, LA2A or, any of the others, Pultec or anything like that. You actually can understand why you would choose that compressor over a different one. And I think that a lot of the time is the more important thought process that you have to have when you're mixing is, what do I need to achieve the outcome that I'm looking for?
That's exactly it. And I think 9 times, like if I'm being completely honest, the number of times I pull up sessions that I get from producers and they've got compressors on the strips that aren't actually doing anything because they
Yep.
don't know what a compressor is. And that's fine. But like compressors are so overused. And like, don't get me wrong, they're really handy tools, but it's like you don't just put a compressor on every track because, you know, like you have to actually have a goal in mind, like we've talked about. But yeah, I mean, if you could only have 3 compressors, you really need a good slow one, a good fast one, and maybe like a master bus one. So if you've got a Shadow Hills or an SSL or something like that, you're going to be fine, you know? And like, of course, there's endless variation. Everyone's got their favorite. That's fine. But I think it's important not to get sucked into the thing of like, there's always one more, you know, because you can spend an endless amount of money. And every month on Gearspace, there's like 10 new plug-in compressors that everyone's talking about.
100%, 100%. Let's dive into some mindset type things. I want to know kind of what are the more difficult things that you find about being an engineer slash producer?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. One is like being confident, which I think like it's really easy to, every single producer I know or engineer gets into a spiral sometimes and they're like, God, do I even know what I'm doing? Am I, you know, and it's like, it's completely okay to feel that way because it's an emotional job as much as it is a technical one, you know, like you, at the end of the day, have to be into the music you're working on in some capacity and you have to like you put your self-belief into that, you know, and so it's important to be able to like bring yourself back when you're having a tough day. I think too, it's an unstable job, like especially in this country, and like people often don't talk about money and things like that because, you know, it's uncomfortable, but like there are times where you'll be really busy and there are times where you won't have any work, and that's okay. And it's just learning to like, you know, weather that and make your life make sense. Like almost every engineer I know is pretty dead in December and January, you know, as an example. And like whether it's like having families that don't really believe in music as a career or stuff, often that's a tough time of the year, like for a lot of my friends, you know, and that's also okay. You know, it's like all just about like being able to like deal with all that and sort of stay on top of it and, you know, stay ahead of the game, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating point of the dead times, you know, being at specific times. One thing that can be helpful to do in those situations is obviously you need a year or two of experience to know when those times are bound to happen, and so you can know what to do when you have those sorts of situations. But planning for them, if you know that you're going to have a busy December or January, you can say, okay, I'm going to leave some of my mix work to that sort of time, or I'm going to do some songwriting by myself. I'm going to realize that when I have these dead times, this is the time that I need to step up my social media game. I need to step up whatever that might be that you struggle to get to do when you're actually really busy with work. Because obviously when you're, you know, doing lots of production and recording, you don't necessarily have a lot of time to do those other things. So
yeah, I agree.
I think it's about being smart in those moments to be prepared for those quiet times and go, okay, I'm not going to not have anything to do. I'm going to step into this part of my job.
I think it's remembering too that you as a like producer or engineer or mixer or whatever, like however you describe yourself, it's like you're actually a business. And that's something that I think a lot of musicians take a while to get their head around. And it's hard, right? You know, because everyone you work with is your friend at the end of the day. Like in audio, like more often than not, like you're friends with all the artists, you're friends with the community, you know, but you have to remember that you still have a right to make money and to, you know, like be
so true.
Like everyone has to treat you with respect and you treat them with respect. And like part of that is like whether it's valuing yourself correctly and then like talk to other engineers around you at your similar level and see what people are charging and stuff, because more often than not, like, you know, when you start out, a lot of people are quite insecure or they're dramatically overconfident, right? So it's like all the time you see stuff where like someone has, you know, charged a crazy amount of money for something, then they haven't done a very good job. And I mean, good on them. But the more often one is the reverse, where people are getting paid $100 a day or something, you know, to do something that probably, you know, maybe that's a fair bit lower than the market rate. So I think like being honest and open with the community around you, like talking about that stuff, treating yourself like a business, knowing that when you have quiet times, yeah, you're going to have to do some self-promotion, or maybe that's the time to do your taxes, or like maybe you need to put a bit more away during the busy times to get through those bits. It's all like being a small business owner is like complicated. Like everyone who does it could tell you. So, yeah, I think it's like learning to treat it a little bit more like a job and like your life, rather than just like, this is a fun thing I do with my friends, which
It's
don't get me
so
wrong,
true.
it still is, but you got to balance all those things.
Well, I think that's a funny point, is like, you obviously, everyone kind of starts off doing music as a fun thing and just as like a pastime, and you get used to that, and it kind of, you know, it's reliable as that thing at the time that you can spend with mates, hanging out, jamming and this and that. But if you do want to make it your career and your life, you're right. You just have to value yourself properly, and you have to set goals, and you have to treat it exactly like you said, like a business. It's like, couldn't put it more like bluntly. It's like, you have to be serious about it. Otherwise, you're going to be one of these people that never has any money and is always complaining about, oh, it's too hard and this and that. It's like, well, there are things that you can put in place to ensure that you don't have that mindset, that you don't keep falling into these ruts and making it hard for yourself.
And honestly, that ties back into stuff like, you don't probably need that thing that you want to buy. Like, you know, it's all part of like, how about you focus on making the business profitable before you're buying, you know, $10,000 in plugins a year. And, you know, like that, they're all things we've done. We've all wanted a new synth or a new guitar or whatever the thing is. But I do think it's like, when you decide to make that switch in the, like, you want this to be your job, I think two things are important. One, you need to start exactly like thinking of your life and that like a business. Set boundaries for yourself. Don't take phone calls at 10 p.m. unless you really have to, or, you know, like try and treat it like a job. And then also like just build a community around you of people that you respect and that respect you back, and like people who are okay with you like acting like that, you know. Like it's the kind of, if you've got people being like, come on man, do me mates rates again, you know, it's like, they're actually not treating you with the respect that you probably deserve. If you've, you know, it's different between like maybe doing mates rates once or something. And it's like, you know, if somebody is, especially when you move to a professional level, it's like, it gets to a point where, you know, you have to stand up for yourself, and that can be really hard when they're your friends.
And like the age old adage of time is money. It's like, it's simple as that. Like, when we live in this world that we live in, time is money. And if you're getting paid not enough to cover your time, you won't be able to live. It's really simple as that. Yeah. Thanks so much for yeah, well, that's it. There's no point. Thanks so much for joining me today. This has been so sick. I've gotten heaps out of it, and I'm sure everyone that's listening also has.
Thanks so much for having me.
No worries, man. It's been my pleasure. And what I like to do just before we wrap it up is to ask for that final piece of advice that you could give to, first of all, producer engineers, and then artists.
Sure. I think for producer engineers, just like stay hungry for knowledge, you know, keep learning, keep your ego in check. Like, even if you want to be the best producer or best mixer in the world, there's always something to learn, and go into every situation wanting to take something out of that. You know, it's like, it is so cool spending a day with somebody who's better than you and like taking something cool away, because like you just got better, you know. It's like, you don't have to take that as a hit to your ego. So I think that's like the main thing. Stay really excited about what you do and keep learning stuff, because that's how you get better.
Love it.
And then for artists, I think it's a really tough road, but you have to believe in yourself and you have to have a vision. The number one thing I see holding artists back at all stages of this is like when they're just doing it because it's what they've always done. You know, I think you actually have to like, you have to have something that you want to show the world, and you have to be your biggest evangelist, because no one else is going to do that for you. So it's like, the artists I see most succeed are the ones who really have a vision, believe in themselves, and are able to like convince everyone else of that. You know, it's like, because they end up being the star that everyone around them orbits. You know, it's like, you don't make it unless you've got that. And pretty much everybody who does is like that.
And also, like that ties into that, rewind this podcast back about 10, 15 minutes and listen to the finance and business talk again, because it comes in part with being an artist and doing those things that you said. You got to take yourself seriously and step it up.
Take yourself seriously and step it up, but also, think about things like intelligently. Like if you're not making much money, you don't need a 5-piece band because you can't pay them. It's like work at the level that you're at and have plans to grow.
That's it. Well, again, Hamish, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome. And thank you all for checking this out, listening and watching wherever you are. If you could do us a favor and share this podcast, that's how the word gets around, whether that's in a conversation with someone, in a DM, on your stories, as a post, any of those little things that you could do that take about 5 seconds really, really helps this podcast spread. And that's what we want to do. We want to get this information out to as many people, because we love our guests and love people hearing from them and all that sort of thing. But also hit follow or subscribe on the platform that you're listening to this on or watching it on, so you can stay up to date with all of the new episodes that we are going to be releasing in the near future. So, and yeah, thanks again. Thanks, Hamish.
Cheers.
All right, bye. Thanks for listening to What's That Sound? Make sure you hit follow or subscribe on your podcast platform to stay up to date with each new episode. We'll catch you next time.